So much. Good morning, everyone. It's my pleasure and privilege to be here and join you today, so thank you for the invitation. Start with a short story to kind of set the tone and the context for what I like to talk about today. A merchant in Baghdad sent his servant on an errand to the bazaar, and the man came back white with fear and trembling. He said, "Master, while I was in the marketplace, I walked into a stranger. When I looked him in the face, I found it was death. He made a threatening gesture at me and walked away. Now I am afraid. Please give me a horse so that I can ride at once to Samarra and put as great a distance as possible between death and me." The merchant, in his anxiety for the man, gave him his swiftest steed. The servant was on it and away in a moment. Later in the day, the merchant himself went down to the bazaar and saw death loitering there in the crowd. So he went up to him and said, "You made a threatening gesture at my poor servant this morning. What did it mean?" "That was no threatening gesture, sir," said Death. "I was surprised at seeing him here in Baghdad." "Why would he not be in Baghdad? This is where the man lives," said the merchant. And Death replied, "Well, I had been given to understand that he would join me in Samarra tonight, you see." So, as Honan Sunan said, my primary work is as a palliative care chaplain at Beaumont Hospital. And actually, my vocation and occupation as a chaplain, and I'd say also that as a Buddhist monk, is not something I had ever planned or envisioned for myself. I wouldn't claim to have had a calling to the work that I do now years before I ventured into this path, the causes and conditions of my life that made it such. But there were some transformative kind of experiences that inspired me to pursue what I do now. And one of the early ones was that right after I ordained as a novice, I saw in some people around me that were dealing with old age, with illness, with death. The same, if you remember the story of Siddhartha before he became the Buddha, had these 4 sights or visions when he went outside of the palace and encountered the reality of life and saw the suffering that was inevitable and present throughout life. So in some kind of parallel way, I kind of had these same experiences after I ordained as a monk and saw that then it was my calling that I discerned that if I'm really going to be of service to walk this bodhisattva path and to embody and act and practice compassion, I had to become familiar with all the various ups and downs of life, however comfortable or uncomfortable they may be. So that's eventually a few of the things that led me to do what I'm doing now and to pursue all the training and different things that I've done. But one of the things that I often hear when I tell people about the work that I do, either it's, "Oh, you do what?" and kind of, pull back a little bit like, "That sounds pretty morbid." Or the other common response I get is like, "I could never do what you do. I don't know how you do it." And when I think about that, I often think that, well, I don't know if that's really true. If somebody else couldn't do what I do, a lot of other people do what I do already. And what I found for myself is that I didn't think I could do what I do either before I was doing it. But it was just that exposure and that experience, and that even things like illness and death especially in the context of a hospital setting, which can be pretty intimidating. I'm never one who liked going to the doctor's office, and I've never been hospitalized yet. So all of it was very strange and unfamiliar. The setting and all the different things that happen. Maybe some of you have had other experiences, have been in those settings or circumstances for yourself or for others, so can in some way maybe resonate or envision what that's like, that feeling that you may have. But I found after I started my internship at the hospital and eventually a residency there, and being on call at weekends and overnights, I had to encounter a lot of dying and death there. And it was something that after time became less strange. Not that it didn't continue to have an impact on me personally. The people I was seeing in front of me and their families, it was very, very difficult. It's always difficult. And I wouldn't say that it ever gets easier, but that it becomes less strange and less unfamiliar. And in fact, it happens quite a lot. Last year at the hospital where I work, there were close to 1,400 deaths that occurred in the hospital, about 500 on the hospice unit, the palliative care and hospice unit where I primarily work. And some of those people do end up spending their final days or hours or even longer periods of time by themselves, without companionship, without family, without friends. So I'll talk a little bit more about the No One Dies Alone NODA program that you may have already heard about, and what we're doing with that work there. But I think one of the bigger things or observations that I've noticed in my studies and in my work is that there seems to be a general kind of death anxiety or kind of death phobia within our culture. That it's something that we don't want to look at or to acknowledge, primarily because it is uncomfortable and it's hard, and it may bring feelings of sadness or regret or guilt or other things, other feelings and sensations that are difficult to sit with, difficult to acknowledge. And that has consequences. That has ramifications for when we turn away and we don't look at the reality of our lives. In fact, it's one of the three poisons that we talk about in the Buddhist tradition of passion, aggression, and ignorance, of turning away. So for myself, I made the decision to turn into, to look at it, to confront that fear, that general anxiety that I had that I wasn't comfortable with, to dive deeper into it. Some of the consequences of ignorance in that aspect of our lives, as I said, does have consequences. About 2/3 of Americans do not have advance directive or living will completed. A lot, in many studies that have been done, patients with advanced cancer did not know what their prognosis was or had a different opinion or idea from that of their doctor. And most of them didn't think that they had a different opinion. So that affects how individuals are able to plan for the end of their life, the last phase or last chapter of their life. And some people end up getting the kind of medical interventions and treatments they may not want if they get to a point where they're, for whatever reason, unable to articulate their own wishes or preferences or speak for themselves. In my work in the ethics service, we get consulted a lot for that type of issue, that we have somebody that's in the hospital that's very, very sick, and we don't know this person, who they are, or what they would have wanted because, again, for whatever reason, they're unable to speak for themselves. So then we turn to the family and we ask them, maybe their partner, their spouse, their adult children, tell me about who your mother or your father or your partner is. And have they ever thought about what they would want in a situation like this? And oftentimes that answer is, I don't know. So, again, that turning away and not thinking about, not liking to think about or talk about the inevitable does have consequences, good or bad. I won't judge or say that, but leave that for you to think about. Well, this kind of death anxiety that we seem to see in the United States, in our general culture, is not universal. People in other places do think about and even practice for their own death. So I think there may be some kind of traditional or folk wisdom we could look at around the world to get a different perspective. Some of them are from different Buddhist cultures around the world. Among a particular group of Buddhists in Nepal, dying is regarded as an intricate art to be learned. In the medieval and Christian tradition, you may have heard of the art of dying, or the memento mori, or the ars moriendi, right? So centuries ago, the cultural attitude and response to death was much different than it is today, where today, again, in our culture, it's been institutionalized and pushed away and hidden behind the walls of hospitals and nursing homes and other kind of institutions. But that wasn't always so. For a group of people in Indonesia, known as the Korowai, death and dying are frequently subjects of everyday conversation. People often speak spontaneously of themselves as being in the process of dying. And in another tribe in Sulawesi, Indonesia, according to their funeral traditions and rites, they will often keep the corpse of their deceased loved one in the home until they have the resources to provide for the proper funeral rites, and will clothe them and change their clothes, feed them, have them in family photos and such. There's a very interesting TED Talk if you like to see it. And again, it may sound morbid, but there are prescriptions from within the Buddhist tradition and from the Buddha himself that encourage us, again, to look towards this phenomena of life, such as the Maranasati meditations. Mindfulness of death is to be cultivated. In the Hindu epic, the Mahabharata, the sage king is asked, of all the things in life, what is the most amazing thing? And the answer that he receives back is that a person, seeing others all around them, thinks that they will never die as the most amazing thing. And the Buddha is cited as saying, of all footprints, that of the elephant is the deepest and most supreme. Of all contemplations, that of impermanence is the deepest and most supreme. So I'm not sure how you could contemplate impermanence better than maybe thinking about your own mortality and death. In fact, there's even smartphone apps that can help you if you need a reminder. There's one called We Croak, WECROAK. And it's got the icon, the little app icon, is that of a frog, We Croak. And they give you kind of randomly generated quotes several times throughout the day. And part of that, I guess the premise for this app is based on a Bhutanese folk saying that in order to be a happy person, one must contemplate death no less than 5 times a day. So there you go, if you're looking, and I believe the app is free too, if that helps inform your app downloading decisions. And there's other daily recitations within the Buddhist tradition that have been prescribed as well. such as the 5 reminders, which are, I am subject to aging. I have not gone beyond aging. This is the first fact that one should reflect on. I am subject to illness. I have not gone beyond illness. I am subject to death. I have not gone beyond death. I will grow different, separate from all that is dear and appealing to me. And I am the owner of my actions, my karma, heir to my actions, born of my actions, related through my actions, and have my actions as my arbitrator. Whatever I do for good or evil, to that I will fall heir. And these are advised to be recited daily. Oh, every breath closer to death. A group of Buddhist monks were asking the Buddha, or trying to show off how mindful of death they were. They say, I think about death occurring within the next day and night. And the next monk said, I think about death occurring within this day. The third monk said, I think about death occurring over the course of my meal, so every bite that I take, every bite that I chew. And the next monk said, I think about death on both the inhalation and exhalation of every breath. And the Buddha said, you're all negligent. You're all wrong. You should think about death on every in-breath and every out-breath. Between each breath. That's where our life is, in that moment. Because if you don't complete that breath cycle, the inhale or the exhale, guess what? Guess what happens? So, I'll stop there. I have more I could say. And I will say more at the No One Dies Alone training, which I'm happy to talk about and answer questions, but I'll just tell you a little bit about that right now because I know some of you have expressed an interest. So we're resuming this program that we had at Beaumont Royal Oak several years ago called No One Dies Alone. It's a volunteer-driven program to provide a reassuring and comforting presence to, as I said, patients who may be alone in their last days or moments. The current training on Saturday, April 6th, filled very, very quickly. I was overwhelmingly surprised and impressed at the response. I wasn't expecting so many people to be interested in desiring to learn about this and to volunteer, but the class has 65 people signed up right now, with another about 35 on the waiting list. So I need to schedule another class. So I'm hoping to schedule the second class in hopefully sometime in June, which would be another Saturday. It's an all-day training and lunches provided there. So if you're interested in that, touch base with me or Hoden Sunim, and I can get your contact information and make sure you get notified if you want to go on my mailing list. And I have other information and newsletters too. And one other thing I'll leave you with before we open it up here is just one recommendation. I had a lot of books I thought I could bring with me, but I decided just to bring one because my bag was heavy enough already. This one is called Awake at the Bedside, Contemplative Teachings on Palliative and End-of-Life Care. And this was edited by Koshin Paley Ellison, who is a Soto Zen monk out of the New York Center for Contemplative Care. He's kind of like, again, one of the rock star kind of monks in terms of talking about contemplative care and palliative care and end of life. So this is a really great book, and you can check this out too if you're interested. But let me leave you with just one last reading here, which is a poem from, I think, one of the more profound poets of the 20th century, Khalil Gibran, and this is on death. You would know the secret of death, but how shall you find it unless you seek it in the heart of life? The owl whose night-bound eyes are blind unto the day cannot unveil the mystery of light. If you would indeed behold the spirit of death, open your heart wide unto the body of life. For life and death are one, even as the river and the sea are one. In the depth of your hopes and desires lies your silent knowledge of the beyond. And like seeds dreaming beneath the snow, your heart dreams of spring. Trust the dreams, for in them is hidden the gate to eternity. Your fear of death is but the trembling of the shepherd when he stands before the king whose hand is to be laid upon him in honor. Is the shepherd not joyful beneath his trembling, that he shall wear the mark of the king? Yet is he not more mindful of his trembling? For what is it to die but to stand naked in the wind and to melt into the sun? And what is it to cease breathing but to free the breath from its restless tides? Only when you drink from the river of silence shall you indeed sing. And when you have reached the mountaintop, then you shall begin to climb. And when the earth shall claim your limbs, then shall you truly dance. Thank you.